Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the authors and editors discuss news and events with a splash of history. Our host today is Dan Masterson. Joining him is Jim Dunnigan, well-known military author and the Dean of Wargaming. Also, joining today's show is columnist and author retired Colonel Austin Bay.
Austin, you wrote an article this week that used the term the grim beeper in it. Where did you get that idea? Austin, you wrote a column this week where you used in the title the term the grim beeper. Where did you get that idea?
I got the idea from a fellow named Michael Doran of the Hudson Institute. He wrote a piece about the Israeli pager beeper attack that was picked up both on Powerline blog and Instapundit, and thought this is perfect. That this is gallows humor of the highest order. Totally witty, but it also aptly describes the discreet nature of this attack, because you dial the guy's number, or in this case, send a coded message, and it detonates the explosive that's inside the pager. And instead of the Grim Reaper, it's the Grim Beeper. It's funny, but it's not funny, gallows humor, and at the same time, it describes the operation.
So what is the effect of this attack, Jim? What's going to be the follow-on?
Well, the head of the IRGC, the Iranian Islamic Republican Guard Corps, ordered all of his people to stop using any electronic communications. All messages now have to be delivered by courier. They don't have any homing pigeons, so that's out. So literally, they have people running around in basically in Lebanon, telling who to do what, and it's taking a long time, and it's slowing them down. Now, to show that they're still in business, they fired a bunch of rockets into northern Israel, but that was just a minor exhibition of, hey, I'm still here. There were some injuries. They'd already killed some school children in an earlier attack, but they are hurt. They are hurting. Now, they only had about 40 people killed, and most of the 3,000 or so survivors will be back to work. A lot of them are basically scared. They think it'll happen again. Like I said, the Iranian leadership thinks it'll happen again. And for God knows how long, they're going to be slowed down because they're going to be using, couriers to deliver, messages. They're not dependent. I mean, the Iranians have basically eliminated all electronic communications. That is still the case with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the Israelis have a big advantage because they're not worried about this. They communicate fine. And they basically killed a number of senior Hezbollah leaders. They are basically planning on doing something they haven't attempted for years, and that's to invade southern Lebanon and destroy the thousands of, hundreds of sites where the rockets are stored, ready to be fired. A lot of the Hezbollah teams that were tasked with going to these sites and launching rockets, when told, are dead or wounded. And a lot of them aren't coming back to the job even after they recover from the wounds inflicted on them by the exploding beepers. So it's a great psychological victory, and Israel is making the most of it. Now, it remains to be seen how effective that will be. But again, it's an opportunity they wouldn't have had without the beeper.
Dan, the reports I read said that the IRGC is inspecting all of its equipment. As a matter of fact, in the column that you mentioned, I bring that up. It didn't just say electronics, all of its equipment. That's how deep the fear, panic, paranoia is, based on, again, the discrete targeting delivered near simultaneously. It's scared the leadership and spread distrust throughout Hezbollah, and also we're seeing the echoes of that through the Iranian the Revolutionary Guard Corps. And one other point on this is that there was a second wave the next day, within 24 hours, of radios, as in walkie-talkies, exploding. There weren't as many as the pagers that went off, but in walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah. The Israeli intelligence succeeded in putting small amounts of explosive into the radios. So that reinforces Jim's point about the electronics, fear of using electronics and being monitored or having them explode, and therefore they go back to the oldest way, reliable way of passing a message is sending a human being a personal messenger. Of course, they can be intercepted by a sniper. They can be corrupted. Essentially, you've thrown Hezbollah's and Iran's communications back to 100 BC. And maybe they could start using smoke signals. I don't know, but I suppose the Israelis would be able to see those. One other, I'll add one other thing too. If the Iranian Guard Corps really is inspecting all of its equipment, it'll be inspecting its ammunition as well. Because there have been, I pointed this out in that column, but there have been 2 or 3 other people that remarking about the CIA and Special Forces operation in Vietnam called Eldest Son that put rigged rifle and machine gun rounds and mortar rounds into North Vietnamese Army stockpiles so that when one of these rounds was fired by a soldier or a mortar crew, they'd explode. And there was enough evidence gathered over the 2.5 years that this operation went on that it was quite successful. And the North Vietnamese soldiers became distrustful of their own ammunition. And what the Israelis are doing is making it, setting the conditions that Hezbollah, I assume other Iranian proxies, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which through Al-Quds is interfaces with all of these proxies, they distrust their electronics and I guess their ammunition as well.
Jim, I guess one thing this points out is that everybody's supply chain is vulnerable, right?
Yes, and the Israelis had apparently planned this for a while. They had gone all the way back to not so much the suppliers, but the middlemen, the wholesalers, and that's where they were able to, so to speak, get access to shipments before they went out and sabotage them, and say nothing about it, of course. And eventually, what happened happened, and now the IRGC, Hezbollah, they're all in disarray. Now, how long this will last is hard to say. It could be months, it could be longer, but you can be certain that the Israelis are going to act on this, confusion as they can. They're going to try and, demolish as much of Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies in the region as they possibly can, before the enemy, overcomes their fear of, using electronics or other equipment. And yes, that business with the explosives implanted into the ammunition, that was used somewhere else more recently. And of course, they undoubtedly, there are some Iranians who are aware of that, and they're probably inspecting their ammunition as well, because who knows what those devilish, satanic Israelis are up to. They're capable of anything, and now the Iranians believe it.
Jim, one of the essays I read about that ammunition operation that CIA ran mentioned 2 or 3 other historical examples of seeding the opponent's ammunition stockpiles. They mentioned the British not in Rhodesia in the 19th century, early 20th century, and it's not a new technique. What the special forces and CIA did, though, was go a long way with teams, inserted teams going deep behind the lines and getting into the stockpiles, the North Vietnamese stockpiles. In other words, truly affecting the supply chain. And it wasn't something just left around for the NVA to pick up. They inserted it into some of their biggest and most important ammunition dumps. I am certain the Iranians believe that the Israelis may have done something similar. And who knows? We may even see some exploding missiles in Yemen when the Houthis try to fire one.
Well, even if that doesn't happen, all these bad actors fear now that it will. They see this and say, "Oh my God, those satanic Israelis and Americans and whoever have got a new tool that they're using against us, and we can't trust our own ammunition. So this will pay dividends, like I say, for who knows how long before things calm down and they can get back to business as usual. And like I say, in the meantime, the Israelis are going to make the most of it. They're going to be bombing targets all over the place. They've already started, and they're not going to stop until they demolish as much of the Hezbollah and Iranian infrastructure in Lebanon and Syria as they possibly can.
Right. Austin, they're going after targets in Syria too, right? Like Jim said.
I read reports, two different reports. One said that there were a handful, that's a bad pun, I suppose, since so many of these guys had their fingers blown off, but of explosions in Damascus. And another report said that in Damascus and in a couple of other Syrian towns, Lebanese Hezbollah has operatives in Syria. They could have been Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps or Al-Quds operatives with the beepers. What's interesting about that is the attack is very discreet. It's individualized. It goes to a specific individual. They didn't have a person's name on it, but whoever was high enough rank or in the command channels to get one of these pagers is going to be a legitimate target. They're certainly in the command channel and also the other communications channel. And the attack was near simultaneous and spread over an extremely wide area. There were explosions in Beirut, of the pagers blowing up in Beirut, throughout the Bekaa Valley. One map I saw, it was the same one that had two different places in Syria with the explosions, showed explosions in Sidon and Tyre, the Lebanese ports that are in southern Lebanon. And so there wasn't time, if there was another method, to warn anybody that had one of these pagers. They went off, within a minute to 2 minute window for the most part. And Jim may know more about this than I do. I'm not quite sure what how these were rigged. I've read a couple of pieces where analysts were coming up with good guesses, probably accurate guesses of how the Israelis rigged the explosive. One of the articles that I read about this said that one of the targets who got rid of the pager and it managed to explode near him said it started getting very hot. So there was a heat component to it, if we can believe that report. But then again, that was over a very wide area. It was like having 3,500 snipers out, and if not killing, wounding. The last numbers I saw were over 36 killed, and 2,000 plus 2,300 was another number wounded, and some of that's based on reports from Lebanese hospitals. So that's 2,500 to 3,000 casualties.
So one of the most interesting people that was hit by this, Jim, was the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon.
He got hurt, exposed as well. Nobody realized Iranians were operating that closely with Hezbollah. There was a connection. I mean, Hezbollah is sponsored by Iran, but the ambassador was in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing by international rules, and he got hurt, literally, for doing so.
So the result of this, Austin, is it going to be, like Jim said, a invasion of southern Lebanon by the Israelis?
I think that invasion's already on, and we're recording this on September 27th, I think. Is that the day? Yeah, that's the day. And go back 2 weeks. Go back to the 12th or 13th. There were already airstrikes. There were alerts of more reservists being called up. I'm not sure of the date of what I'm about to describe. I want to say it was 7 or 8 days ago. I saw an Israeli brigadier general being interviewed by a correspondent in Israel, and he was basically said he was assembling a force. Some reservists were reporting. So wait a minute, brigadier general, okay, and it was it wasn't clear where this particular interview occurred, but the message I got out of it is more reserves. They're going into southern Lebanon, and over the last 3 or 4 days, the troop movements have been. There's enough. Israel's a small place. Anybody with a cell phone can get a photo of Merkava tanks moving into an attack position. And plus, the Israeli government has basically said, not just Netanyahu, but other senior officials, that we're going to stop this. We're going to stop we're going to destroy Hezbollah's ability to attack us with these rockets. Now, that's a huge mission, but as Jim said, they're sitting over there in these bunkers in southern Lebanon, several thousand, tens of thousands of various rockets and missiles, and they're going to go in and clean them out. How long is it going to take? I don't know, Dan. How many casualties on both sides? I don't know. But the Israelis are tired of having to evacuate their cities and towns in that northern area that's really can be hit with a longer range mortar round in northern Israel by shooting from Hezbollah shooting from southern Lebanon. So it looks a little bit like the early 1980s and a little bit like 2006 when the rocket war, last time the Israelis went to Lebanon in force to confront Hezbollah. I think it's already underway.
Yeah, the Israelis put together a division-sized force. That's a large unit by the Israeli standards, because usually their largest unit is a brigade. But they're putting a division of soldiers up there into action. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the Israelis are basically carrying out an operation in which they're going to destroy all the tunnels. That's a major operation. Now, they've been preparing for a long time. The Israelis in the past have developed deep penetration sensors, which could basically detect tunnels. They did this years ago when Hamas was digging tunnels into Israel, and then they would come up. The plan was soldiers would come up and they'd attack behind Israeli lines. The Israelis developed the ground sensor, the underground sensor system, which they probably still have, maybe using again, to find those tunnels before they could be used, and they destroyed most of them, or all of them, as far as I know, because none of those attacks were made. They're apparently using something like this again to destroy the hundreds of kilometers of tunnels that Hamas has built in Gaza. So it's a two-front offensive. The major one is in the north against Lebanon, but they're taking advantage of the disarray of their enemies to deal with the situation in the south. The Egyptians are all back behind this because they're sick and tired of taking the overall, being forced to stop Palestinian refugees from getting into Egypt, because they don't know how many of them are actually terrorists. And once the Gaza is cleared, the population can move back in once the Israelis are assured that they've gotten all the tunnels, because there are still Hamas operatives operating in some of these deep tunnels. Some of them have blast doors, so if an explosion goes off in one part of the tunnel, they'll survive in the other one. They've got generators down there, they've got air conduits and what have you. You can live there, and many Hamas operatives have. But again, the Israelis are using this opportunity to basically clean up Gaza as well as southern Lebanon.
Dan, comment on the Gaza operation. I read, I'm going to say 4 or 5 days ago, that the Israelis were considering evacuating everyone that's still in the Rafah area, because they're finding, through various means, more and more non-destroyed operating tunnels in Rafah, and they want to have the area emptied of civilians so that they can go in, and if there are still Hamas fighters in those tunnels, they're going to either surrender or they'll die down there. But mostly, just like what Jim said, they're going to destroy that vast tunnel system that is far deeper and more longer and very, very well supplied in places. So that time and money that Iran invested in helping Hamas dig that huge tunnel system it's going to be lost, and that threat for a while will at least disappear.
So I guess one indication that this is really a invasion that's going to happen is the Lebanese civilians are taking it very seriously because the roads are jammed up from southern Lebanon to northern Lebanon. Of course, the Israelis have been giving warnings that they're going to have air attacks like that in the area, which they have. But there's a lot of people fleeing both from the Lebanese side and the Israeli side. I saw upwards of 175,000 being evacuated by the Israelis from their side of the border. Jim?
Yes, it's true. This is a major operation for both sides. And again, because of the pager blitz and various other, opportunities the Israelis made for themselves, they have the edge. And they're really determined to finish off. I mean, Hamas and Hezbollah will be back, but could be years before they rebuild. And Israel wants to demolish as much of their infrastructure as they can, so that it is a long time before they come back. And the Israelis will, while doing this, they will discover many of the secrets, as it were, of how Hezbollah and Hamas operate in these two areas. And they will basically have a checklist to continually inspect certain things to see if they are coming back and smash them before they get established. So this is a major victory for the Israelis, and they are making the most of it.
Now, one of the things, Austin, you mentioned that the stockpile of rockets there in Lebanon, and the figures go all the way from 100,000 to close to 1 million, depending upon whose figures you look at. But the biggest fear is that the Iranians have smuggled in ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles, and assembled them there in southern Lebanon. What do you know about that?
All I know is first of all, what type of ballistic missile. Certain they've got some short range battlefield ballistic type missiles. They're not that large. They've cropped up in Yemen, given the porosity of Lebanon. They probably have some in there, and they easily hit Tel Aviv. Some of I'm calling them short-range ballistic missiles, but they have the range to strike Tel Aviv. But then the Israelis, of course, have their air and space defenses, David Sling, Iron Dome, plus other anti-missiles that you can carry on aircraft. I don't think that that's as big a threat as some commentators have written. I think the Israelis have a pretty good grip on where those might be. Also, if the Israelis are as good as they have proven to be in electronic interception, they would know those kind of missiles would have Al-Quds advisors from Iran. They're both monitoring the stockpile, but certainly when they becomes operational and they're going to fire it, they'll be there monitoring it. So, as long as they can keep tabs of where the Iranian operators are, they'll have some idea where the missiles are. One of the scarier scenarios, and this isn't new, it's one though that does crop up, is that Iran has a small nuclear device that they've hidden in southern Lebanon or in a bunker or whatever. Iran has no problem sacrificing its Arab proxies. The Iranians, Aryans as they are, don't like the Arabs. They're Semites. The Arabs are, and there really is both a historical, cultural, and, in their view, racial animosity on the Iranians' part. So the Israelis can kill all the Arab proxies that they want. But to seed a SEED, an Arab village with a nuclear weapon, and then detonate it when the Israelis show up, I think would be one of the worst political decisions that Tehran could make. And I'm not. I've read this as being a concern for over a decade that Iran might try that. If I don't even know that they actually have a working nuclear device, but that strikes me as more of a dark and grim threat than the short range ballistic missiles. Israel's already just showed what it can do on what was a mass attack of Iranian drones and missiles. And they came out, Israel came out very well. The air and space defenses worked. So I don't think that's as big a problem. The problem is all those shorter range rockets that they can just use the devastating effect on Israeli towns. You overcome the shorter range defenses. That's why the Israelis pull their civilians out of those sectors, because they could be swamped by firing several hundred rockets in a short period of time. Of course, the thing is, in order to do that, Hezbollah's rocket crews have got to come out, and the Israelis are monitoring that, and then here comes a counter battery fire.
There was one ballistic missile that did land in Tel Aviv. It didn't hit its intended target, which I believe was the Mossad headquarters. It hit an apartment building, killed one person, and wounded a bunch of others. But that was the only one that ever got through, and the Israelis considered that a fluke. Somehow, there was multiple failures at the same time, and bam, it got through. So the Israelis have no doubt tightened up their BMD, ballistic missile defense systems, since that little incident. Some things like that are a reminder that your defenses are never perfect. So you have to keep working on it.
And that's why you have to go to the offense at some point, because and push the other guy and don't let him just shoot at you. There was a term that used to be used in missile defense, because for 4 years it was a reserve slot. I was a strategist, and it was Ballistic Missile Defense Office, which was the name of missile defense during the Clinton administration. And a leaker is what they called a missile that got through. It was a leaker. And in war games, they were all on computers. We really weren't fighting a space war. There would be an occasional leaker that you'd watch on the screen coming towards the target, coming towards the target. Here go all of your THAADs, Patriots, and in cases we were playing with other could be and now are defensive missile systems and the like. And I remember one, it was supposedly a modified Scud, comes right through and then lands right in the middle of this port that we were supposed to be defending. It was carrying a conventional warhead. They get through. And that's why you need to go back and attack the missile launch sites, so you don't suffer that consequence.
Well, that's a good place for us to end. We're at time, and so we will talk to you gentlemen next time.
In October.
Bye, guys.
In October. Yep. Bye.